The Ming Dynasty, founded through revolt and rebel rivalry. The Ming Dynasty, officially known as the Great Ming, was an imperial dynasty of China from 1368 until 1644 and followed the collapse of the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty. The Ming Dynasty was the last of China's imperial dynasties to have been ruled by the ethnic majority Han Chinese people. Although the capital of Beijing fell in 1644 to a rebellion led by Li Zicheng, who established the short-lived Shun dynasty, numerous rump regimes ruled by remnants of the Ming imperial family, collectively known as the Southern Ming, survived until 1662. The Ming Dynasty was founded by the Hongwu Emperor Zhu Yuanzhang, who ruled for the first 30 years until his death in 1398, and had attempted to create a self-sufficient society of rural communities that were organized in a rigid, immobile system that would guarantee as well as support a permanent class of soldiers for his dynasty. The standing army during Hongwu's reign exceeded 1 million soldiers, in addition to the, at that time, world's largest navy based in Nanjing. He also took great care in breaking the power held by the court eunuchs, enfiofing his many sons throughout China and attempting to guide those princes through the Huang Ming Zhu Shun, a set of published dynastic instructions. This process ultimately failed when his teenage successor, the Hongwu Emperor, attempted to curtail the power of his uncle, which prompted the Jingnan campaign, an uprising that placed the Prince of Yan in power as the Hongwu Emperor in 1402. The city of Yan, later renamed as Beijing, became the established secondary capital during the Hongwu Emperor's reign, organizing the construction of the Forbidden City, restoring the Grand Canal, and establishing imperial examinations within official appointments. His eunuch supporters were rewarded with employment as a counterweight to the Confucian scholar bureaucrats, and one of his eunuchs, Zheng He, famously led 7 voyages of exploration across the Indian Ocean as far as Arabia and the east coast of the African continent. The emperors Yongle and Hongwu also expanded the empire's territorial rule into Inner Asia. The rise of new emperors and new factions diminished some extravagances after the capture of the Emperor Yingzong during the Chumu crisis of 1449. These cutbacks led to the imperial navy falling into disrepair, while forced labor was used to construct the Liaodong palisade, while also used for connecting and fortifying the Great Wall into its present form. Through wide-ranging consensuses, estimates for the late Ming era population varied from 160 to 200 million, while wide-ranging tax revenues that squeezed everything possible from poorer farmers meant many turned to smuggling to overcome these financial difficulties. By the 16th century, European trade had expanded, albeit through islands such as Macau, through government restrictions to mainland trade. Crops, plants and animals were introduced into China through this system of trade, and items such as chili peppers were introduced into Sichuan cuisine, while maize and potatoes aided famine relief and helped spur growth. The main European trading nations with China at this time were the Portuguese, the Spanish and the Dutch. While Chinese products were exported, there became a huge demand from China for South American silver. The introduction of silver helped monetize the economy of the Ming era, as its paper money had suffered from repeated hyperinflation and was no longer trusted. While creating a new rich class of people, the introduction of silver, while initially seen as successful, it proved devastating when a mini ice age caused shortages in the production of agriculture. The value of silver rapidly increased due to disruptions in the Spanish and Portuguese supply. This in turn meant farmers were unable to pay their taxes. Combined with crop failures, floods and an epidemic, the dynasty collapsed in 1644 as rebel forces under the leadership of Li Zicheng entered Beijing. Li then established the short-lived Shun dynasty, but it was soon replaced by the Mongol-led 8-banner armies of the Qing dynasty. Founding of the Ming through revolt and rebel rivalry. The Mongol-led Yuan dynasty had ruled for 97 years before the Ming dynasty was established, and explanations as to the demise of the Yuan include institutionalized ethnic discrimination against the majority Han population. This in turn sparked resentment and eventually rebellion. Other factors included overtaxation when the people were already suffering from inflation, and natural disasters such as flooding along the Yellow River as a result of irrigation projects being abandoned. A consequence of this led to the economy and agriculture being very poorly operated, which in turn led to rebellion erupting, particularly when hundreds of thousands of peasants were recruited for repair work on the Yellow River and other subsequent irrigation projects. A number of groups of Han Chinese revolted, including the Red Turbans in 1351, who were affiliated with the Buddhist secret society White Lotus. One of those influential penniless peasants was Zhu Yuanzhang, a former monk who gained a reputation as a rebel commander after capturing the city of Nanjing, which he later established as the capital of the Ming Dynasty. With the ruling Yuan dynasty in a state of disarray, rival rebel groups began competing for control of the country once the inevitable fall of the Yuan had taken place. By 1363, Zhu had eliminated all his rivals, including Chen Yuliang, at the Battle of Lake Poyang, arguably the largest naval battle in history, when Zhu's navy of 200,000 were able to defeat a Han rebel force of more than 650,000 in strength, mostly through the use of fire ships. This victory left Zhu Yuanzhang in control of the Yangtze River Valley and consolidated his power in the south. Zhu then made his imperial intentions known by advancing towards the Yuan capital of Dadu, present-day Beijing, in 1368. As the final Yuan Emperor fled north to the lesser capital of Chengdu, Zhu declared himself emperor of the new Ming dynasty after the former imperial palaces were razed to the ground, and the city was renamed as Beijing, and Zhu took the name Hongwu, meaning vastly martial, as his era name. Reign of the Hongwu Emperor. As emperor, Hongwu began his reign by building infrastructure, with his first project being a 48-kilometer wall around his capital of Nanjing. This was followed by the construction of new palaces and government buildings. In the history of Ming states, it describes that Zhu Yuanzhang began the drafting of a new Confucian law code in 1364. It was completed in 1397 and known as the Da Ming Lu, and repeated several clauses from the old Tang Code of 653. Another similarity to the Tang was the military system known as Wei Suo, known as Fubing during the Tang era. In 1380, Hongwu had his chancellor, Hugh Weiyong, executed upon suspicion that he had conspired in a plot to overthrow the emperor. Hongwu then abolished the chancellery and assumed the combined role of chief executive and emperor. This president continued throughout most of the Ming dynasty. With a growing suspicion of his ministers and subjects, Hongwu established the Embroidered Uniform Guard. This was a network of secret police appointed from within his own palace guard. During his reign, around 100,000 people were executed during a series of purges to eliminate threats. A number of edicts were issued forbidding Mongol practices and purifying China of any barbarian influences during the reign of the Hongwu Emperor. However, he also continued to deploy policies of the Yuan, such as requesting Korean eunuchs and concubines, Mongol-style hereditary military institutions, Mongol-style clothing and hats, as well as promoting archery and horseback riding, such as employed by the Yuan cavalry. He even had large numbers of Mongols serve within the Ming military, with around a third of all officers being of Mongol descent until the late 16th century, in addition to significant numbers of Jurchens serving in the military. Manchuria during the Ming Dynasty. After the overthrow of the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty in 1368, Manchuria remained largely under the control of the Mongols through the Northern Yuan dynasty from their base in today's Mongolia. Naghachu, a former Yuan official and a general of the Northern Yuan, had control of the Mongol tribes in Manchuria, chiefly today's Liaoyang province in northeast China. He had an army of hundreds of thousands, enough to threaten an invasion of the newly founded Ming Dynasty and possibly restore Mongol power within China. Instead of waiting for Naghachu to attack, the Ming attacked the Mongols in 1387, which resulted in a resounding defeat for the Mongols and the Ming controlling Manchuria. By the end of the Hongwu reign, most of the inhabitants of Manchuria were at peace with China, with one exception, the wild Jurchens. In 1409, during the reign of the Hongwu Emperor, Yoshida, a eunuch of Haishi Jurchen origin, was given the role of leading an expedition to the mouth of the Amur River to pacify the wild Jurchens. However, by the time of the death of the Hongwu Emperor, this had not been achieved, and by 1435, the Ming court mostly ended its presence in the region, and by the end of the late Ming era, this region was almost totally abandoned by the Ming. Reign of the Hongwu Emperor. Zhu Yuanzhang, the grandson of Hongwu Emperor, was specified as his successor, and after Hongwu died in 1398, he assumed the role as the Jianwen Emperor. However, one of Hongwu's most powerful sons, Zhu Di, disagreed with the decision, and a political showdown developed between the two. Jianwen had several of Zhu Di's associates arrested, and in return Zhu Di plotted a rebellion that led to a civil war that lasted 3 years. Under the pretext of rescuing the young emperor from corrupt officials, Zhu Di led forces in a revolt that saw the palace in Nanjing burnt to the ground, with the emperor, his wife, mother and courtiers trapped inside the inferno. Zhu Di then assumed the role of emperor, taking the name Yongle. His reign from 1402 until 1424 is universally viewed by scholars as the second founding of the Ming dynasty, as he reversed many of the policies enacted by his father. Yongle demoted Nanjing to the role of secondary capital in announcing Beijing to become China's new capital in 1403. Construction of the new city began in 1407 with hundreds of thousands of workers employed in the project until at least 1420. At the center was the imperial city, the center of that being the Forbidden City, the palatial residence for the emperor and his family. By 1553, the outer city was added to the south, bringing the overall size of Beijing at that time to 6.5 by 7 kilometers, approximately 4 by 4.5 miles. Beginning in 1405, Zheng He, the favored eunuch naval commander, was given the role of admiral in charge of a fleet of ships to develop overseas trade. I've previously made a video of the voyages of Zheng He, and I will leave a link in the description. The shipyards of Nanjing constructed over 2,000 vessels for the 7 voyages of Zheng He, with the largest treasure ships measuring up to 134 meters or 440 feet in length and having a width of up to 54 meters or 177 feet. During the reign of the Hongwu Emperor, woodblock printing was extensively used to spread Chinese culture, while the military was used to extend its borders, including into parts of Vietnam. Ming decline and the reign of the Li Emperor. During the reign of the Li Emperor from 1572 until 1620, there were several problems that faced the Ming Dynasty. During the early years of his reign, Li surrounded himself with able advisors and made a conscientious effort to handle affairs of state. His Grand Secretary, Zhu Yuanzhang, built up an effective network of alliances, but after 1582, there was no one skilled enough to maintain the stability of those alliances, with officials often of opposite political factions. Over time, Li grew tired of court affairs and the political quarrelling of his ministers, preferring instead to remain within the Forbidden City and away from those officials. Eunuchs became more powerful as they became intermediaries between the emperor and his officials. Any official who wanted to address the emperor had to persuade the most influential eunuchs, often with a bribe, just to have their message relayed to the emperor. Role of eunuchs. During the reign of the Hongwu Emperor, eunuchs were forbidden to learn to read or engage in politics. However, during and after the reign of the Hongwu Emperor, eunuchs were given greater roles, including managing imperial workshops, commanding armies, as well as roles in appointing and promoting officials. Hongwu had 75 of his eunuchs in charge of foreign policy, travelling to places such as Annam, Mongolia, Tibet, and less frequently to Japan and Nepal. By the late 15th century, these travels were mostly only limited to Korea. Although there were some dictatorial eunuchs throughout the Ming era, excessive tyrannical power by eunuchs did not occur or become evident until the 1590s, when their power was increased by the Li Emperor. The eunuch Wei Zongxian dominated the court of the Tianqi Emperor during his 7-year reign from 1620 until 1627, with the eunuch having his political rivals tortured to death, most of whom were vocal critics from the faction of the Donglin Society, an ideological and philosophical movement of the late Ming and early Qing dynasties of China. Wei ordered temples built in his honor throughout the empire and built personal palaces created from funds allocated for building previous emperors' tombs. His friends and family gained important positions without the necessary qualifications. He also published historical texts lambasting and belittling his political opponents. The instability at the imperial court came at a time when natural calamity, pestilence, rebellion, and foreign invasion were at a peak. In 1627, when the Chongzhen Emperor began his reign, Wei was dismissed from court, with Wei committing suicide shortly after his dismissal. The eunuchs created their own social structure. This provided and helped gain support to their birth clans. Instead of fathers promoting sons, it was uncles promoting their nephews. The Heishan Hui Society in Peking sponsored the temple that conducted rituals for worshipping the memory of Gang Ti, a powerful eunuch of the Yuan dynasty. The temple became an influential base for those highly placed eunuchs and continued in that role though eventually somewhat diminished during the Qing dynasty. The fall of the Ming, the rise of the Manchus. Nurhaci, a leader of the Jiangzhou Jurchens, had been a Ming vassal who considered himself a guardian of the Ming border, unified the Jurchen clans to create a new Manchu ethnic identity. He offered to lead his armies to support Ming and Joseon armies against Japanese invasions of Korea in the 1590s, but Ming officials declined his offer. Recognizing the weakness of Ming authority in Manchuria at the time, Nurhaci conquered or consolidated power by co-opting surrounding territories, even declaring himself Khan in 1616 when he established the later Jin dynasty, in reference to the previous Jurchen-led Jin dynasty. In 1618 he openly renounced the Ming, effectively declaring war on them with the 7 grievances. 7 grievances. The 7 grievances, also known as the 7 Great Hatreds, was a manifesto announced by Nurhaci. There were several accounts as to what the 7 grievances were, including one from the veritable records of the Manchus, another from the Qing veritable records, as well as from Nurhaci's successor, Hong Taiji. According to the account from his successor, the 7 grievances were: the Ming killed Nurhaci's father and grandfather without reason. The Ming suppressed Jiangzhou and favored Yehe and Hada clans. The Ming violated agreement of territories with Nurhaci. The Ming sent troops to protect Yehe against Jiangzhou. The Ming supported Yehe to break its promise to Nurhaci. The Ming forced Nurhaci to give up the lands in Chaihe, Sanche, and Fuan. The Ming's official Shang Boze abused his power and rode roughshod over the people. Shortly after the announcement of the 7 grievances, the attack against the Ming on Fushan started. Han defectors played a very important role in the Qing conquest of Ming China. Han Chinese generals who defected to the Manchu were often given women from the imperial Isangyoro family in marriage, while the ordinary soldiers who defected were often given non-royal Manchu women as wives. The Manchu leader Nurhaci married one of his granddaughters to the Ming general Li Yongfang after he surrendered Fushan in Liaoning to the Manchu in 1618. In retaliation, a year later, a Ming punitive force of about 100,000 men, which included Korean and Yehe soldiers, approached Nurhaci's Manchus along 4 different routes. The Manchus scored successive victories, the most decisive being the Battle of Sahu, in which Nurhaci defeated Ming Dynasty and Korean troops that were far superior in numbers and armaments. In 1636, Nurhaci's son and successor, Hong Taiji, renamed his dynasty the Great Qing at Mukden, modern-day Shenyang, which had been their capital since 1625. Hong Taiji also adopted the Chinese imperial title Huangde and changed the ethnic name of his people from Jurchen to Manchu. In 1636, the second Manchu invasion of Korea forced Joseon to become a Qing tributary as they renounced their long-held loyalty to the Ming dynasty. Rebellion, invasion, and collapse. In the early 1630s, a peasant soldier named Li Zicheng mutinied with his fellow soldiers in western Shaanxi after the Ming government failed to send much-needed supplies. In 1634, he was captured by a Ming general and released on the terms that he returned to service. That agreement broke down when a local magistrate had 36 of his fellow rebels executed. Li and his fellow soldiers retaliated by killing the officials responsible and leading a rebellion based in Rongyang, central Henan. By the 1640s, a former soldier and rival to Li, Zhang Shanzhong, had created a rebel base in Chengdu, Sichuan province, while Li's center of power was in Hubei with support from both Shaanxi and Henan. By the 1640s, large numbers of Chinese peasants were starving, unable to pay their taxes, and living no longer in fear of the Chinese army. Desperate measures meant many formed bands of rebels, while the Chinese military, caught between efforts to suppress Manchu raids in the north and peasant revolts elsewhere, essentially fell apart. Unpaid and unfed, the army was easily defeated by Li Zicheng, by now calling himself the Prince of Shun. On the 25th of April 1644, Beijing fell to Li's rebel army when the city gates were opened by allies from within. During the attack, Chongzhen, the final Ming Emperor, hanged himself from a tree in the imperial garden just outside the Forbidden City. Seizing the opportunity, the Eight Banners, or Manchu army, crossed the Great Wall after Ming general Wu Sangui opened the gates at Shanhai Pass. Wu had learned of the fate of Beijing and decided to side with the Manchus. While a Manchu army headed south, Li's army headed north, meeting at Shanhaiguan, where Li's army was destroyed, Li himself fleeing Beijing on the 4th of June. 2 days later, the Manchus entered Beijing and proclaimed Shun the Emperor of China. After being forced out of Xi'an by Li Zicheng, then chased along the Han River to Wuchang, then along the northern border of Jiangxi province, Li Zicheng died there in the summer of 1645, thus bringing to an end his Shun dynasty. Some reports claim he died by suicide, others that he was beaten to death by peasants after trying to steal their food. Despite losing their capital and their emperor, the Ming were not totally beaten. There were several pockets of resistance in Nanjing, Fujian, Guangdong, Shanxi and Yunnan. These scattered remnants of the Ming, with no clear leader, remained until the proclamation of the Republic of China, when the Qing itself was defeated in the early 20th century. That brings us to the end of this video, highlighting a historical era that has helped shape China today. If you've enjoyed watching and it's shown you a little detail of life and events here in China, then your subscribing to my channel would mean a lot to me. Thank you for watching. Make sure you click on the link to the next video, and until the next time, goodbye for now.